World this week, and with us is Anne Bagamer of the International Herald Tribune, Aude Baron of Le Plus, the Nouvel Observateur's interactive website, Tunde Fatunde of the Lagos Guardian, gracing us with his presence here in Paris, and Craig Kopidis of Quartz, the new business website of the Atlantic Monthly Group, which launches September 15th. There's a possible storm brewing over the Republican convention. That's right, it's hurricane season. One could be headed Tampa's way. Organizers insist, though, that it's not enough to expect any disruptions to preparations. Thus, the infomercials that are the nominating conventions for president should go according to script. Well, there are sometimes surprises. After all, Republican Congressman Todd Akin of Missouri, who this week apologized for stating that there were cases of legitimate rape, women can avoid pregnancy. He apologized, but he resisted his party's call to drop out of his race for the Senate. Anne Bagamer, it's interesting that this story has really highlighted to a certain degree. At one point, when we were looking at it this week, we were wondering, there's that tired old mantra, it's about the economy. But at what point do values become central to voting?
Well, it's still about the economy. It's just that the conversation now has taken on a much broader tone. This election was always not just about any one set of issues, either economic or social. It was always going to be about, especially as Mitt Romney has emerged as the presumptive Republican nominee, it was always going to be about what kind of country America was going to be and what Americans wanted from their government. More, in the case of what the Democrats are proposing, greater involvement and greater investment by the government in all areas of life, or less. And if you look at the Republican proposals, scaling back investment in Medicare and other kinds of social entitlements and letting the free market do what the free market supposedly does the best. It's not too surprising that the conversation could get knocked off course, because what kind of people do we want to be? What kind of country do we want to be is frankly a very scary discussion. And I think there are a lot of ordinary Americans, I think there are a lot of extraordinary Americans who feel uncomfortable having it. And in that category, for the moment, I would put the two nominees, or the presumptive nominees of the two parties. Now, when they debate, as they will at least once, I believe the first debate is in October sometime, mm-hmm. They're probably, if I were the moderator, that's one of the first questions I would throw out. Is, what kind of country does this want to be? They're going to have to confront it eventually. But up until now, they haven't really grappled with that in as firm a way as they are going to have to. And so the public can be, and the conversation can be distracted by somebody like a Representative Akin, who, let's face it, for some member of the Science Committee of the House of Representatives, really doesn't know much about science.
The United States ever more polarized, Craig Kopidis.
It is. On my recent trip there, it seemed very clear from everyone I spoke to is dividing in two camps. Some people, do you want a CEO to run America, to get America out of its economic malaise, or do you want a socialist? This is the argument, and it's from those 2 points that the arguments stem out. And you have in this mix, at least on the Romney side, the Republican side, this infantile, contentious, and bumbling Akin, who represents the evangelical side of the Republican Party, which has a lot of supporters. And as Anne says, these are frightening people. And the most frightening thing about them to me is their supporters hold them up as some sort of Don Quixote type figures, when in essence, people like Akin and this guy who's running for sheriff in New Hampshire who wants to use deadly force to stop abortions, these are bumbling Sancho Panzas, and they're extremely dangerous people, because at the end of the day, there's a maliciousness about them. And that's the most frightening part. So
explain to me how come Todd Akin could actually win that Senate race.
Because there are America is a Protestant, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant country. That's how it was founded. Puritans out of Boston, as opposed to the Quaker ideal from Philadelphia, which was more liberal. The Puritans won that war. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people believe in this, that they can turn to you or they can turn to Anne and they say, I'm going to control your body. And there are many women of this ilk who will go along with this kind of nonsense. And what it does, it gets in the way of the important debate. I'm not saying I'm pro-Romney or pro-Obama, but Romney has a lot of very solid business, market-oriented ideas that could be employed to get the United States out of its doldrums. Some are good, some are bad. But any substantive discussion about that is overshadowed by this pox on the Republican Party of these right-wing evangelicals who think they have the right to control your morality. Well,
Right,
they
and so
don't.
Certainly seizing on the moment have been the Democrats and, of course, their candidate.
We shouldn't have a bunch of politicians, a majority of whom are men, making healthcare decisions on behalf of women.
Aude Baron, seen from France, it's really hard to understand this debate. Several French people have told me this week.
It's absolutely amazing because it's very interesting when you see in the United States one of the most read articles on the internet was about the fact that he doesn't want to drop out. Whereas in France, what struck people is just what he said, talking about legitimate or illegitimate rape, as if, you had some good and some bad rape. So happy for me, I had a good rape, And, just for people in France, first, the debate of abortion just doesn't exist because a huge majority of French people, for them, just to legalize the fact that you can't abort, it's just crazy. So just the only fact that abortion is in the center of the debate in the presidential election in the United States, just this thing, they can't understand. And after this, that someone, who could be senator, who say that you can have some legitimate or illegitimate rape, it's just amazing. And on YouTube, many web users, they react through videos, through parodies, through remix of the original videos. And you saw one who is very interesting because the movie The Fall, the story about Hitler, very often you can see some parodies of it. And there's one, and you can see Hitler who's just so mad, not because the fact that he says there's a legitimate or illegitimate rape, but because he doesn't want to drop out. So you also see, where is the debate in the US? He can say you can have, some legitimate rape. It's a mistake. Everyone can make some mistake. But the fact he doesn't want to drop out, that's a very serious problem.
All right, both sides energized certainly over this. And by the way, the other issue of the campaign heading into the Republican convention is that the running mate of Mitt Romney is somebody who co-sponsored a bill with Todd Akin against federal funding for abortion, Paul Ryan. And it's interesting to see Republicans expecting him to energize the base. The first major poll since Ryan entered the campaign and got out on the campaign trail shows a bump, but a very slight one. The Republicans, according to NBC, had been on a 6-point gap, and now, as you can see, a 4-point gap for now going into the convention. Perhaps not the bump that they were expecting. Tunde Fatunde, when you watch this campaign, do you wonder why it's so close, or do you wonder at this point whether there's still suspense? Because listening to Craig Kopitas there, it sounds like Obama has it in the bag.
Well, let me put it this way. Listening and reading about the presidential election from Nigeria, one gets this impression that the main debate itself, the economy, has taken a backseat. Because if today China has excess liquidity, and I'm told about 700 billion American Treasury bills are in the hands of Chinese, which again makes America vulnerable to Chinese interests. And once you put all this into this context of issues that should be of major preoccupation to the American presidential candidates, you get this impression that, unfortunately, at this time, there are no great men and women who are there to save the country out of this economic mess.
Too true. Well put.
All right, we're going to speak about China in a moment again because the man who ran Ethiopia for 21 years was enamored in some ways with the Chinese model. We're talking about Meles Zenawi, who passed away at the age of 57 in a Brussels hospital. The official news had come this week, an unspecified illness. Meles Zenawi, who had not been seen in public since an African Union summit, was hosted in Ethiopia in June. After overthrowing the bloody regime of Mengistu Haile Mariam, Meles shed his Marxist dogma to become a donor darling. His country claimed double-digit growth and an end to the famine of the 1980s. And he's become a trusted ally in the fight against Islamist radicals in Somalia, twice invading to flush them out of Mogadishu. Meles Zenawi, who Tunde Fatunde leaves a political vacuum now, a secretive regime, and there's a lot of jitters after his departure.
Well, the thing about Ethiopia and many of the developing countries, once there is a transition period, unfortunately during the transition period, successors are not built. In fact, the person who takes over does not plan to get himself succeeded when he or she is alive, this time around men. And Ethiopia happens to be in that kind of situation, with Eritrea also in that kind of situation. Leaders don't build successors. And so once they suddenly leave, there is a vacuum and there is tussle for power. And if it implodes, it can lead to political stability in Ethiopia and the surrounding states. Don't forget that there is a lot of worry about the Islamists, the Al-Qaeda in that region. You have Yemen that is still struggling against Al-Qaeda. You have Somalia that is also struggling. And you have Eritrea that allegedly is also sympathetic to Al-Qaeda. And you have Ethiopia as the only country you can depend on for now, under the dead.
The safest pair of hands.
Exactly.
We should say.
So it's a very complex situation after his death.
It's a mixed bag. Meles Zenawi, toasted by the West, despite his open admiration for the Chinese way of running the economy and perhaps of doing politics as well. The Wall Street Journal, in its lead editorial on Thursday, said that Mr. Obama on Tuesday lauded Meles' unyielding commitment to Ethiopia's poor. This is the same Mr. Obama only a few years ago called on Africans to cultivate strong institutions, not strong men. While The Economist points out that Ethiopia is not the only African donor darling with perhaps sometimes an unsavory human rights record. Leaders in Rwanda and Angola, two other booming strongman states, should take note. Institutions matter. The West should resist the temptation to look for another Meles. Democracy is the Horn's best hope. Anne Bagger-Murray, did the West turn a blind eye because of that fight against Islamists was a blind spot?
Almost certainly. It wasn't resources. Ethiopia doesn't have any oil. The one thing that the West could count on from the late Prime Minister, is that he would be an ally in the fight against terrorism. When you start talking about donor darlings, and the next question is, well, what can the donors do? Can they attach strings to their donations? Can America say, okay, you get another 800 million next year, but it better come with some human rights? That's never worked. It doesn't work in that way. It'd be nice to think that it would, but there's a certain resentment of the donations, and with that resentment comes a resistance to do what the donors say. So, the situation in Africa is not very different from the situation in the Middle East. And it's not going to change anytime soon until the way of, especially America, dealing with its donor states changes as well. Before we go, vintners in one of Burgundy's most prestigious wine-growing villages seeing red this week after news that Louis Eng, an executive in Stanley Ho's Macau gaming empire, has bought the chateau at Gevrey-Chambertin,
along with nearly 4.5 acres of prime vineyards. Why are they angry? Well, the estimate on the plot, 3.5 million euros. The price paid, 8 million.
This is extreme. The amount given has nothing to do with the value of the property, especially not the vineyards. What's worrying is the rising vineyard price for the future generations.
That's globalization. Whoever has money can buy.
All right, so on the one hand, saying this is extreme and basically this is going to mean that soon the locals will be dispossessed of their own lands. On the other hand, Craig Capitas, you heard that other one saying, well, this is globalization. They've got the money.
It's sour grapes. It's baloney. It's the best thing that could have happened to Burgundy, which is an area I've written about for many years. First of all, this chateau was a dump. It was a tourist trap. You paid a couple of bucks. You went in, you had a couple of glasses of cheap Pinot, and that was it. The chateau only makes 12,000 bottles of wine a year, and it's not very good. I think there's only one Premier Cru there. What they're going to do is put money into this and ramp up the quality of this wine. And what's really, really interesting about it, that the National Front, who's the big complainer on all this, they're going to be employing more people at this chateau. I believe they've already brought in the prestigious and honored winemaker Eric Rousseau to oversee the redoing of this. Believe me, there's going to be no plane loads of Chinese vintners coming over to work in the fields. Work in Burgundy, making Bourgogne wine, is a very difficult, stoop laboring process that's been done by the people of that area for over 1,000 years. And this is the best thing that could have happened. And anyone who's complaining about this, and those who complained about it said, well, the government should give them the money. The government doesn't have the money. You want more Chinese investment. The fact that the Chinese would go in there, take this on, deal with French Sécurité Sociale and the various jurisdictional things that they have to deal with, is terrific for the Côte de Nuits. Well done.
All right, you'll raise your glass to the Chinese investors.
Highly.
We will leave it there. I want to thank you very much. I want to thank Aude Baron, Tunde Fatunde, and Anne Bagger-Murray. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.